If you're new to the channel, then welcome, and if you're returning to the channel, then welcome back. I just want to extend a quick thank you to all of you for tuning in. So lately, one of my favorite things to do has been listening to a ton of podcasts. Actually, not just lately. I've been listening to podcasts on YouTube for probably 5 years at this point, but I just really enjoy it because it's nice to just have something to passively listen to while you're doing something. And the great thing about YouTube to host a podcast is if you're listening to it and you want to be actively engaged in it, it's nice having the visual of the video there of, kind of feeling like you're involved in the conversation. But one of my favorite podcasts to listen to lately has been the Iced Coffee Hour with Jikh and Stephan. And obviously with Stephan, it's going to be kind of financial focused. And last week they actually had a very cool guest on there, another finance YouTuber by the name of Andrei, Jikh. And overall, when it comes to how the podcast went, I would say it was pretty good. In fact, I would say it's one of the best podcasts that Graham has done so far. Maybe the other one might be a toss-up between Andrei and Meet Kevin. But again, overall, really great podcast and a really interesting discussion on the overall state of the economy of Las Vegas and the state of real estate in Las Vegas, which brings us to today's video. So obviously, like I was saying before, when it comes to Stephan's podcast, it's going to have a pretty heavy financial spin, but that's what you're here for. That's what you're at this channel for, is financial stuff. So I can just point you to more other good financial things. With that said, one of the best parts of the podcast was the discussion between Graham and Andrei about what's going on in the local economy of Las Vegas and kind of their different perspectives and their different takes on what the real estate market is like in Las Vegas. And it was actually kind of a heavy discussion. At one point, Andrei says, let's shift focus because the conversation has gotten kind of heavy and dark. And I think he's right, because what they're really talking about is the local economy and the real estate market and the kind of effects that it's had on the local residents of Las Vegas. So before I jump into the commentary any further on this subject that they discussed, I would definitely encourage people to go out and watch the podcast. I'll put a link in the description in case anyone wants to check it out. And the particular conversation that I'm going to be commenting on starts at around the 20-minute mark. So if you want to go and listen to that first and then come back and hear what I have to say about it, I would recommend going and doing that. But just diving into it, what was Graham's perspective? What did he think? And obviously this is just kind of my summary, my analysis, and just paraphrasing. I think from Graham's perspective, he really sees the local real estate market for Las Vegas as one that's really good and desirable for a lot of incoming residents, especially for people who are incoming from high cost of living areas. See, one of the things that the pandemic has done is made the reality for a lot of big businesses and corporations and companies to say, hey, it's very feasible to have remote workers. And in a lot of cases, it's cheaper because we don't have to go out and purchase expensive commercial real estate to put people in office buildings. And on the other side of that coin, it's, made the reality for a lot of employees to say, hey, if I can do remote work, I don't have to live in a super high cost of living area like California. I can go somewhere else that's a more desirable city to live in and has a much lower cost of living, especially in the real estate area, because I can get a much bigger house or a much better house in a better area for a lot less money. And Graham's analysis of the real estate market in Las Vegas and other similar cities has been something that really reflects that. He's seeing listings that aren't even lasting a week long in some places, and houses really seem to just be flying off the shelves in these areas. And that's for both resale and new construction. Now, when it comes to kind of the eviction crisis that people are talking about, or the foreclosure crisis that could be coming up that people are talking about, he doesn't really see the data that has any proof that that would happen. He even made a video about the upcoming eviction crisis where he states something along the lines that the data shows 97 or 98% of people are still paying their rent on time and in full. So it doesn't seem from his perspective that there's an eviction crisis on the horizon. So from his perspective, it seems like the real estate and a lot of, most of the local economy seems to be doing really good and makes places like Las Vegas a very desirable place to live in. And when it comes to Graham's perspective, I think this makes sense because he does fit a lot of the criteria that I've kind of laid out for Californians who want to move from high cost of living areas to low cost of living areas. Now, when it comes to the same subject matter when they're discussing it, what does Andrei think? Well, interestingly, Andrei's perspective is almost completely the opposite of what Graham's perspective is. See, for Andrei, as a Las Vegas resident, and I think he's lived there, maybe he lived there all of his life or most of his life, I can't remember exactly what he said. But the point is that Andrei has been a resident of Las Vegas for quite some time, and from his perspective, what he's seeing is that the real estate market and houses are extremely overinflated. For Andrei, he's seeing all of the Californians and incoming residents that are trying to come to Las Vegas. They're overvaluing the homes that are on the market, and it's caused these prices to drive up dramatically. And because the real estate market has become so competitive, it's essentially pricing out all of the local Las Vegas residents from being able to buy or purchase a home. Now, combine this with the effects that the pandemic recession has had on the local economy of Las Vegas. He's not as optimistic as Graham when it comes to potential upcoming foreclosures or evictions. Andrei knows that a lot of local workers have lost their jobs, have gotten furloughed, or are just making less money in general. And even the people who are continuing to make money, they're not as competitive as incoming Californians who, make a much higher salary than the local Las Vegas residents do. Again, this is because they're bringing in more money and they have, the potential to buy more expensive homes, and the Las Vegas residents who don't make as much because their salaries aren't as competitive just kind of get left hanging in the dust. And when Andrei's coming from this perspective of looking at the local economy and especially like things of the service industry and casinos, I think it makes sense for him to view things as, not as optimistic as Graham's perspective is. And I think what's very interesting about this, or particularly noteworthy about this discussion that they're having, is that both of their perspectives are correct. They're both right about what they're observing and what they're saying. And even more interesting, and part of the title of this video, is that their discussion really highlights this idea of the K-shaped recovery. So the idea of a K-shaped recovery is basically as follows. Anytime you have what would be considered just, a plain economic recovery, you can think of that as like all of the different economic sectors are just rising upwards on a graph, right? So if you had a line graph and you had multiple lines representing different parts of the economic sectors, then if they were all trending upwards, even if they were at different paces, as long as they were going up, then the economy can be considered as recovering. Well, the distinction in a K-shaped recovery is that, say you have different parts of the economic sector, and half of them are trending upwards while the other half are trending downwards. So if you're looking at lines on a graph, you might have 10 lines representing one part of the economy and 10 lines of the graph representing a different part of the economy, and they're growing in two different directions, diverging like this, essentially making a K shape. Hence the name, a K-shaped recovery. And a more practical recent example of this you could think of would be like tech stocks seem to keep booming and going up, while airlines are continuing to fall and collapse. Now, abstracting that idea of the K-shaped recovery even further and applying it to something like what Graham and Andrei are discussing, you really are able to illustrate the idea of the rich get richer while the poor get poorer. And this is a very relevant idea when we're commentating, or when I'm commentating and analyzing Graham and Andrei's discussion about what's going on in cities like Las Vegas and Phoenix and Austin, where it's just become, very popular for people from high cost of living areas to move to what are much lower cost of living areas. Now, when we're applying this rich get richer and poor get poorer idea, the comparatively rich in this case would be the Californians. They're able to move into these low cost of living areas and get a lot more value for their money. They're able to come in and buy up real estate and assets to grow their net worth. And they're the comparatively rich in this case because their salaries that they're bringing are at a California level, and they're competing against people in cities where the income is, at least noticeably lower. Now, what's interesting is that it's creating a seller's market in these local real estate economies or local real estate sectors, because if you're a home builder or a home seller in Las Vegas, Phoenix, or Austin, it's become a seller's market for you because people are coming in and they have money and they're buying up houses quickly. But at the same time, for these incoming residents from these other states, because they have money and they're getting more value for their money, it's also simultaneously a buyer's market for them. And so you do have this effect of the real estate market in these local economies, on the rise. However, what's happening to the comparatively poor in this example? Well, they're losing their jobs, they're getting furloughed, there's a lot of economic uncertainty for them, especially if they work in the service industry. These are people who work jobs like restaurants or even own restaurants as like small businesses. A lot of small businesses in general are being impacted. Restaurants, servers, bartenders, movie theaters. I mean, even bigger jobs, more, ideally stable jobs like the airline industry is being heavily impacted by these things. So because they're making less money and they're getting laid off from these jobs, they're priced out of the opportunity of buying homes. And when it comes to the idea of potential foreclosures and evictions, I mean, the possibility is there because if these people are losing their jobs, that's them potentially losing out on the ability to pay their mortgages and their rent fees. And also, don't forget, we're talking about cities that are very desirable to live in. So it's not just the real estate market for people who are buying and selling homes that are able to raise their prices, but because the cities are becoming more desirable to live in general, then the apartment complexes and the townhomes and even the home renters are able to boost their prices as well. So just finding any kind of home to live in, whether you're buying or renting in some of these cities, is going to be much more difficult if this trend continues. And I think Graham and Andrei's discussion really highlights what's going on in a lot of these cities that have become desirable to live in across the country right now. Half the country seems to be going up and the other half of the country seems to be trending down. On one hand, you have people who are in a recovery phase of the economic recession or never even experienced any negative impact other than just having to stay inside and work from home. On the other hand, you still have people who are continuing to feel or even have yet to feel the economic impact from the pandemic. And so I think at this point, it's pretty much indisputable that the people or the economy itself is in a K-shaped recovery from that perspective. And so for me, I don't know, I wasn't expecting this conversation to go down in Graham and Andrei's podcast, but it was very interesting and appealing to me, and it really just got, the gears cycling my head and thinking about this topic even further, because it really illustrates what's going on in the greater economy across the country right now, and I'm sure in other places around the world as well. But again, what do we do with this information? Frankly, I don't really know what to do with this information other than, start thinking about it and come up with potential ideas on how we can prepare ourselves as individuals to face what may or may not be coming. Now, obviously, there's been a lot of talk about stimulus bills and stimulus plans that, could get passed to help ease some of this negative impact that we felt from the pandemic recession. But again, if you've been watching my videos, then you know that last week I talked about how I don't really see a stimulus bill or a stimulus plan going into effect until after the election, and basically until, whoever the newly or re-elected president is and takes office. And there's also been a lot of talk about very short timelines to develop and distribute a vaccine. That could happen, but frankly, my opinion on that from what I've been seeing is that it's not likely until next year, sometime maybe in the middle of next year, that we would see a vaccine. And on top of that, there's a lot of uncertainty on how many people would be willing to get the vaccine as soon as it comes out. So that just, both of those factors just continue to add more economic uncertainty regarding what our future will be. So yeah, I think this was just another week of doom and gloom, which is not my intention, but it's just what's going on right now. I do hope that you at least found the video interesting. I encourage again everyone to go out and check out the podcast that took place between Graham and Andrei, especially that discussion. I think it was really good and again, very interesting. How many times have I said interesting in the video? I think that's the word of the video. But anyway, comment down below. Let me know what you think of Andrei and Graham's discussion. Let me know what you think of my perspective. Am I way off on this? Am I pointing in the right direction? Like the video. It's going to let me know if you guys want to see more content like this. And subscribe to stay up to date. I'll see you all next time.